All right, ladies and gentlemen, hello and welcome back once again to the only coast-to-coast radio show that's all about the information economy. It's time for Inside Analysis. Yours truly, Eric Kavanaugh here. And we're going to do a very special show today. I'm going to ride solo. I'm going solo because we got some big news, actually, to talk about. I'm pretty psyched about this. Yours truly attended a conference last year that was really quite remarkable. It was one of the most interesting conferences I've attended. It was a big conference in terms of the name, in terms of the heavy hitters who were there. Oh my goodness, it was the Reuters NEXT Conference. That's the actual name, N-E-X-T. It was in Manhattan. I was invited last year to attend, and it was frankly tickled pink to get such an invitation. Reuters, of course, is a highly esteemed news organization with reporters all over the world covering major issues, and I have tremendous respect for that organization. I'm not super big on my respect for many American media companies these days, quite frankly, because it's all been terribly politicized, and that is unfortunate because news is really important. And I've worked my entire career in the news industry, trying to help people understand what's happening, trying to share insights, but also just share facts, right? If you get right down to it, facts are what news stories are supposed to be about. And now we have a lot of editorializing in news, and that is probably not the best development for the consuming public because we want to know the facts. We want to know what happened. You know, I remember in my first job a long, long time ago, my editor taught me something that I will never forget. He basically said that says, that's the word S-A-Y-S, says should be like punctuation in a news story. And what he was describing is that we don't know what people think. We don't know what they believe. We know what they say. And therefore, in a news article, you should never read a sentence like Senator Johnson believes such and such, because you don't know what that person believes. You know what they say. You know what they do if you can verify it. And usually that's by something someone else said or a printed record somewhere, some first party witness, a video that you watch, for example. But it's very important to remember that we don't know what goes on inside the heads of people. And a lot of times, of course, you see this style in journalism where they want to make it active. They want these active verbs and really engaging content. And that's all great as long as you stick to the principles of news gathering and news reporting. Now, of course, you also have editorial departments, and that's a wonderful part of the news media as well, but it's not the same as actual news. So I have a great deal of respect for Reuters and for what they've done and continue to do to spread their practice of news gathering around the world. And so, wow, let's get to this show. So I attend this show. There are about 250 maybe people in the room, maybe 300, very small venue in Manhattan, but a very nice venue. And of course, all the big Reuters cameras are in the room, and they're filming this and broadcasting it live all around the world. Absolutely amazing cast of characters. There were two prime ministers, including Justin Trudeau, who called in, to be fair, but the prime minister of Lithuania was online. I'm a quarter Lithuanian, so I was pretty excited about that. And they had 40 chief executives in the room from Fortune 500 companies, Fortune 2000 companies, I suppose, including the CEO of Morgan Stanley, James P. Gorman, whom I met briefly, and he was hilarious. He was a real character. He was very funny. He had a lot of fun, interesting things to say. And the reporter kept kind of chiding him, trying to get him to say something unpleasant about their investment in Twitter. This was kind of interesting. She kept asking questions like, well, apparently it's a very long strategy that you've got here, or how big a loss are you going to take, and things of this nature. And he kind of sat there and just took it all in. And then finally he said, we're not stupid. I almost fell off my chair. He says, we're not stupid. He basically went on to say, look, Elon Musk is a very special person. He's one of these rare individuals in the world who is changing how business gets done. And he said he wouldn't underestimate Elon Musk and what he's doing over at Twitter, right? Because this is right after the announcement was made that in fact he was buying Twitter, and in fact the event was right before the Twitter files came out. That's an interesting story in and of itself, but I'm kind of giving you some background about Reuters Next and why I'm so excited about it, and why I'm excited about the fact that I'll be speaking at this year's Reuters Next conference. More on that in just a moment or two, but let's get back to James P. Gorman and his commentary. He said, he suggested to the reporter and other people listening that if you doubt Elon Musk, he said you should take a tour of a Tesla factory. Well, he went on to talk about his view on the world. And granted, this is before the collapse of Silicon Valley Bank, which, of course, just happened a couple of weeks ago. That is a big deal, folks. I got to tell you, that is a very, very serious event that took place here in the United States and in the global financial markets. And of course, that follows the FTX collapse, which also was massive. I mean, people should have seen that coming. Come on. This guy is a flake. If you watch him now, this Sam Bankman-Fried, what kind of name is that, right? People know me, know that I joke that we're living in the Matrix, right? And it's mostly the names of people and the names of things that show you it's the Matrix. I'm half joking, but the name is Bankman-Fried, and he's in cryptocurrency and burned a bunch of cash. That's his name, Bankman-Fried. Reminded me of Bernie Madoff, spelled Madoff, but pronounced made off, like he made off with the money, right? Remember Bernie Madoff, founder of the NASDAQ, if I'm not mistaken, which is like holy Christmas. But it was lots of little things that got him in trouble, right? He went underwater when the market went south, and he kept thinking he could claw his way back, and he just couldn't. And so he got deeper and deeper into debt. And that's probably what happened to Bankman-Fried as well. And if you watch some of the interviews with that guy, watch some of the interviews with him from before it came out that the whole thing was falling apart. And you can see him just a nervous freaking Nelly sitting there in these interviews, just freaking out because he must have known that he was way, way, way underwater, right? He's down there in Bermuda or the Cayman Islands or something, and hiding from the powers that be. Yeah. Well, so let's get back to what James P. Corman said. So again, before SVB collapse, but still things are looking a little strange, right? And his commentary was really quite interesting. He said he's not really all that concerned. Now, Morgan Stanley manages, I think he said $2.5 trillion in assets, 2.5 trillion with a T. It's a lot of assets to manage. So they've got a pretty good view on what's going on in the world. They've got a pretty good lens through which to view activity in the financial world. And he said he wasn't all that concerned. He made one really interesting comment. He basically said that, yeah, this whole situation we have here is the result of a decade of free money, right? Free money. Well, when the money is cheap, a lot of people borrow money and they kind of do silly things. And this is kind of what happens in the financial world if you don't have enough tension on the string, if you don't have enough tension in your interest rates. And as my partner, Dr. Robin Bloor, once pointed out, you can't push on a string. So the point is you can only pull interest rates down so far. As you get close to zero, which is where we were for like a decade, close to zero. Now, of course, it is shot up and very quickly. But again, this is back in November of last year that I'm listening to James P. Gorman of Morgan Stanley saying he wasn't all that concerned. He thinks all in all things are doing pretty well. But fast forward 4 months or so, 3 months, what do you have? SVB collapses. Well, what happened leading up to that? Like, just let's get some context around this, right? There is some reporting on this, obviously, in the financial market news. You can find some reporting. I'm sure Reuters has done some great work on this. But one of the key factors that brought down Silicon Valley Bank was the fact that they invested so much money in long-term treasury bills at 1% interest, 1%. So we had a guy on the show last week who had one of the darkest metaphors I've ever heard, but it's just brilliant to describe what that actually means, to describe what they were doing, trying to collect 1% on this massive amount of money as a bank run was imminent, right? And he said it's like picking up pennies in front of a steamroller. Ouch. It's not a very good strategy. But the point was they had all this money. Well, I took a look at some of the numbers that came out and who was exposed by all that. And Bill.com, we use Bill.com. Lots of our clients use Bill.com. Bill.com had $670 million sitting in Silicon Valley Bank, $670 million. That, of course, for those keeping score at home, is 2/3 of $1 billion. That's a lot of money. Now, what Bill.com does, for those who don't know, is they take money from corporations that are paying people, and then they pay the people that money. And it's nice to have this sort of centralized repository, like a marshaling area, if you will, for payment processing, because they bring all sorts of functionality to the table that make it easier for you to do your job as the payor, and make it easier for me to do my job, which is to receive the money. That's what we use Bill.com for, is to receive money. And it's a wonderful thing, because now you get this sort of leading indicator. And what do I mean by that? Well, when someone accepts my invoice through Bill.com, I get an email because I'm registered there. So it says, aha, Dremio Corporation has accepted your invoice. And I'm like, thank goodness. Think about the old days when we used to just send invoices and hope and pray that someone got them and just wait for a check to come in the mail. That was not that long ago. 5 years ago, almost all of our clients paid us by check. We got checks in the mail. And I've, knock on wood, don't think that I ever had a check lost in the mail. Of course, we have that old expression that's kind of funny. People would say the check's in the mail, meaning I haven't sent it yet. But yeah, you can't do that really with a Bill.com, right? You get the email. This is what's nice. You get the email. It says, we got your invoice, and you get an email that says you've been paid, money's on the way. And then this is where fintech comes into play. Then some very clever people like Bill.com, like QuickBooks, like a few other players in the marketplace are doing something very clever right now. And they're saying, hey, person who's about to get some money, you're going to get this money. It's going to clear our system probably in 24 to 48 hours. But if you really need the money badly, go ahead and take it now. We'll just take 1%. Right, which is like, oh, well, okay, $6,500, I'll let go of $65, 1%, just to get that money right away. And I did that just a couple of days ago for a client, because we're a small business, and guess what? It helps to have the money quickly. That's fintech. That is the essence of fintech, a financial technology that is shaking up the whole industry, right? Because they find opportunities to make money off the transaction. So now, because they know a lot of people will want the money soon, they just made themselves $65 on one transaction. What did that transaction cost them? I don't know. I don't imagine too much. I mean, maybe it's $1. It's probably less than $1. So they probably made $64 or more on one transaction. All I had to do was click and accept the contract, and boom, there's the money immediately. Well, that was kind of thrown sideways when SVB collapsed, when the regulators rolled in, they froze the assets, et cetera. They started to unwind what was going on in there. Well, guess what? There were a whole lot of companies that had paid money into Bill.com to pay people like me. And I guarantee you, those companies and my company and people like my company were like, oh no, that's a real problem, as were all the people who had their deposits in SVP, because they were thinking, holy Christmas, we're toast. Remember, FDIC only insures up to $250,000 of any particular depositor. So what you're supposed to do, folks, just in case, for those of you out there who have more than 250 grand in cash lying around, absolutely positively put it in different banks. If you have $1 million and you put 250K in 4 banks, you are fully covered as long as they're FDIC backed. A lot of people don't do that. Right. I'll bet a lot of people are going to learn those lessons now. And I read just an amazing story the other day about like how many tons of gold have been pulled out of JP Morgan Chase's accounts. I saw just a story the other day about like 2,000 pounds of gold. Right. I mean, gold is expensive. A pound of gold is really expensive. I think it's $2,000 for an ounce. So what, $32,000 for a pound, something like that. So you're talking thousands of pounds of gold have been taken away. It's like, geez Louise, man, this is not a good sign. So getting back to what's happening in our marketplace, Silicon Valley Bank, they put all this money in long-term treasuries. And then when the interest rates go up quickly, that means they're underwater. All of a sudden now they have unrealized losses. I saw the infamous Rubini said that he thinks most banks are insolvent right now in the United States, sort of de facto insolvent. Hasn't fallen apart yet, but it very well could. And so I think you're going to start seeing some strange things happening, folks, in the financial world. You saw with Binance, for example, and some of these big cryptocurrency companies, they stopped withdrawing. They stopped allowing people to withdraw money from their accounts because they didn't have the cash to cover it. And of course, banks you don't typically have all the cash of all your depositors, because banks make money by loaning that to people to buy houses and cars and things of this nature. So it's all a question of how much they can actually loan out versus how much they have, what are their assets versus their liabilities. Well, with Silicon Valley Bank, it happened very, very quickly. And despite what some people may say, I can promise you that the United States, having printed roughly $5 trillion out of thin air to save us from the COVID scare, that had a huge impact on prices. Now, I don't know what the exact amount of currency was that got injected into the system, because a lot of that 5 trillion hasn't been paid out yet. So a lot of it is kind of sitting around. There may be some tussling around that in Congress, of course, because there's been some change in terms of who runs that operation, and they will probably pull on some of those strings. But nonetheless, when you print $5 trillion out of thin air, which is exactly what we did, that is going to drive up the price of consumer products. It's going to drive up the price of things like gasoline. And guess what happened? Gas went from $2 a gallon to $4 a gallon. It's still $4 a gallon where I am here in Pittsburgh. And so, yeah, that's kind of a big deal. Well, what happened is it happened so quickly that organizations like SVP were not able to unwind, and they probably wouldn't have been able to any which way you go. And this is the real challenge that we're facing right now. And folks, it is not a small thing, okay? And it's why we need good leadership now. Now, it took a long time to get to that point, but leadership is going to be the subject of my talk at Reuters Next this November 8th or 9th. Don't know the schedule yet, in New York City. And I'm going to be joined by just 3 heavy hitters, folks. I'm so excited about this. I'm going to be interviewing my good friend, Steve Lucas. He is now the CEO of Boomi. I'll be interviewing Steve McMillan, who's the CEO of a company called Teradata, pretty prominent organization there. And also Radha Subramanian. She is the president and chief research and analytics officer of CVS Corporation. So she signed up over the weekend as well. Very, very excited about that. And in particular, about reconnecting with Steve Lucas. Very smart guy, very bright guy, very personable, very engaging. First time I met him was probably 6 years ago at a Sapphire conference down in Orlando. He was the president of SAP America. So that's a pretty big role. SAP, of course, is a powerhouse in the world of manufacturing, of enterprise resource planning, ERP solutions. Of course, they're going to the cloud. They have their whole business technologies group, BTG, they call it. SAP is a huge company. And Steve was the CEO, or the president, rather, of America. He went on to become the CEO of Marketo. They got bought by Adobe, so he went through that process. And then he was the CEO of iSIMS, which is a professional recruitment agency. They're doing some interesting things too. But folks, we'll pick all this up after the break. You are listening to Inside Analysis. All right, folks, back here on Inside Analysis, your host, Eric Kavanaugh. I'm going solo. I'm like Jason Derulo, going solo today for a variety of reasons, one of which is because I'm just so excited about Reuters Next. We just signed the deal today. So again, I'll be moderating, yours truly will be moderating a conference, or a panel, a 30-minute panel with Steve Lucas, CEO of Boomi, Steve McMillan, CEO of a company called Teradata, and of course, Radha Subramanian. She is the president and chief research and analytics officer of CBS. She's going to be in the mix as well. And we're going to talk about leadership. So the exact discussion points are still in the works. We'll figure that out over the next several months, because it's not till November. But I've already been doing a lot of thinking about leadership and what leadership really means, right? And leadership, I think, is the key to every organization's success or failure. If you have a failure of an organization, well, the buck stops here, as they say. You have to be the person in charge. If you're the CEO, the buck stops with you, man. It's up to you, and it's up to you to make sure you have the right people around you, you have the right technologies around you. And folks, I got to tell you, these are going to be very, very tumultuous times going forward. It's going to be a pretty weird world for the next probably 5 to 10 years, quite frankly. And it's going to take some very strong leadership to get us through all of that. And, just to put things in a geopolitical context here, we don't often talk about these things, but I think it makes a lot of sense in this particular domain or this subject area about leadership. And I realize that war like kinetic war, like we have in Ukraine right now, with tanks firing at each other and missiles and buildings being blown up and all these horrible things, war is always a lagging indicator of failed leadership. I promise. Every time you see war in the history of mankind, it is a function of failed leadership. When leaders fail, bad things can happen. When leaders prevail, good things happen. Now, I've got all sorts of opinions about what's going on in Ukraine. We'll keep that for another show and another domain, if you will. But I can promise you there is some serious failed leadership going on all around the war in Ukraine, not just on one side either, but on probably multiple sides. There were lots of leading indicators that things were going to go south. And, a lot of times you just get this disconnect between people in charge and what's really happening on the ground. And this is the job of media, to reconnect that current, to basically get leaders back in touch with what's actually happening. Now, it's easy for some leaders to lose touch with what's happening because they're not around the people. If you're leading from afar and you're not engaging with the people who are working for you or with you, well, it's very easy to get up into an ivory tower and to lose perspective on what's happening. This happens all the time. This is very, very, very common. This is why representatives of government should talk to the people on a regular basis. This is why leaders of corporations should talk to people on a regular basis, and not just the people to whom someone reports, for example. So the CEO is going to have a board of a key staff, if you will. The CEO will report to the board of directors, but you'll have your key staff, your chief executives, your chief information officer, your chief financial officer, CDO, et cetera. You're going to have those people report to you. But most leaders, I think, should know you don't just talk to those people. You should also talk to other people in the organization to stay in touch, to stay sort of in the groove, understanding what's going on out there. Now, what's cool these days is that with all these different technologies we have, it is so much easier for people to work remotely and for managers to know whether or not stuff is done. Because if it's done in the cloud, well, as long as you have access to a particular dashboard or a screen, you can see, was the work done or wasn't it? Did the email go out or didn't it? Did the check go out or didn't it? Right? In the old days, you had to ask people and rely on trust and call people and so on and so forth. These days, a lot of those problems are solved. And then look at ChatGPT. What's going on with ChatGPT? And how will leadership play a role in being able to leverage this technology? This is very important. So I can tell you, for years now, I've been watching, and I'm a media guy. I've been in the media my whole life, my whole career at least. And either in the media or working with the media, adjacent to the media, for my entire career. So I've 33 years now and counting that I've been working in the press. And I've noticed that, well, one way I describe it is that the narrative is always wrong. And what I mean by that is the narrative is a story. The narrative isn't reality. The narrative is a story or a theory about what's happening. And it is a story. So even in the data world, we talk all about storytelling, data storytelling, right? You can look at the numbers and see the numbers, but what does that actually mean? Well, you need someone to interpret those numbers and then to explain to people what's actually happening. Well, there's a bit of an irony here. And when I talk to Steve, I'll definitely want to get some of his insights from his days in Marketo, because there's a lot of information online that is highly misleading, is what I would say. I've done a fair amount of work with all sorts of technology companies, and I've looked at a lot of these different social media engines like LinkedIn, like Facebook, like YouTube, like Google, et cetera. And you look at, I mean, the amount of money that Google makes on ads, it's tremendous. But any system is going to have entropy. And my biggest beef with all of these online solutions you can use, whether it's Twitter or YouTube or Instagram or LinkedIn or Facebook or any of these guys, Google is probably the best in this category from what I've seen in terms of accuracy and relevance of their numbers. But what I've seen from all the others is this pay-to-play scheme that just wildly exaggerates what you get when you pay. And what I mean by that, and I'll pick on Twitter just because it's a recent thing I've seen. If you send a tweet out, I've always joked, the tweet that you send out manually probably is the tree that fell in the forest that no one heard, right? Manually sent out tweets unless you have a lot of followers and are very engaged, aren't going to get a whole heck of a lot of traction. They will get a little bit. You get a little bit of action. And one thing for which I will greatly credit Elon Musk doing in the recent weeks, really, since he took over, is publishing transparently the numbers for tweets. So before, only the owner of an account or someone who had access to that owner's account could see what the results were for that particular tweet, how many impressions were made, for example. You could see retweets, you could see number of likes, the hearts, for example, but you couldn't see what the actual traction was in terms of the number of people who saw it. It's not really the number of people who saw it, it's the number of people who were engaged in some capacity on the app somewhere, somehow, at a particular time when that tweet went across the transom. Point being, the number you see is not the number of people who saw that tweet. It's the number of people according to an algorithm under the covers that determines how many screens this showed up on, whether or not someone was looking at the screen at that moment, for example. So you could have your Twitter up and go to the bathroom and come back. Well, you didn't see anything that scrolled at that point in time. So did you really see it or did you not see it? Who knows? The point is, it's a bit loosey-goosey. But if you go and you pay like $5 or like $10, I think is the minimum. If you pay $10, you'll watch your impressions go from like, 120, 130, which is what I'll often get for a tweet that I just send out, to 1,200, 1,500, 2,000, 3,000. I'm like, wow, look at all these people who saw it. But who are those people? Are those people the people I want to reach out to? Can I track who those people are? No. Short answer is no, you can't right now, at least. So the point is that those numbers are just a bit off. And I've seen this too on YouTube. I've seen it on Facebook. You throw money at these things and the numbers just skyrocket. They just go through the roof. And it's like, okay, is that real or what is that? Did I actually get some value from that? Even clicks, you don't know. A lot of times clicks are bots. So how do you separate the wheat from the chaff? Well, number one, leadership. Getting better leadership at these organizations, I think, would drive change throughout them and get us to a place where we can all feel like we can trust the numbers. And that's a really important thing to have in this world. If you're a marketer, if you're responsible for spending your budget or your company's budget, quite frankly, a lot of times you're spending someone else's money. Well, what do you want to know? You want to know, is it working or isn't it working? Of course, it all depends, and there's a lot of attenuation that goes from the transaction of money changing hands to the outreach or whatever it is to someone somewhere down the road buying your product or service, and even knowing how that happened is still very difficult to do. They call that attribution, right? Attribution is a very difficult thing. I've met with some of the most amazing technologists, people who are doing unbelievable things with web traffic, understanding web traffic, and they'll say, oh, we don't do attribution. Like, what? Why don't you do attribution? Well, because it's really, really hard to do. Now, sometimes it can be easy. If you can trace an email sent to someone to a click they made, to a purchase they made a minute later, well, guess what? That email resulted in the transaction. This, by the way, is one reason why email is still king. I don't care what anyone says. People talk about Google, YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, all these different engines. That's great. But I can promise you, for transactional systems, if you want someone to pay you something, if you want someone to register for a webinar or a white paper or something like that, which is our core business, guess what you got to do? You got to send them an email. And I'm talking, I've been doing webinars now for since 2005. So we're talking 18 years. I've been hosting webinars, first for the Data Warehousing Institute, then for Source Media. We did the Espresso series for Information Management Magazine, which used to be called DM Review, by the way. So our show, DM Radio, that's where it came from. That's where the name came from, Data Management Radio. And of course, this is our newer show, about 7 years old, Inside Analysis. We've been doing these things a long time. And I can tell you, you put up some reg form to register for a webinar and hope people are going to come and sign up. They're not. Like, it's just not going to happen. You would have to have so much traffic to your website, so much interest already in your webinar series to get that kind of traction. I'm sure some people get it. There are some who get that kind of traction. But if you're out there, if you've never done a webinar before, please believe me, you cannot just put up a sign-up form on the interwebs and expect people to come. Ain't going to happen. It takes a tremendous amount of work. And this kind of gets back to my beef about the numbers and all these social media engines, because they throw these great numbers at you. But what the heck does all that stuff mean? What I would love to see is a consortium. Let's get a bunch of these big marketers together and let's just have an honest conversation about what it actually means. And the more transparency we get, the more trust we're going to have, the more spending. If people know something's going to work, if people trust your engine, they're going to pay you. I promise it's going to happen. So I hope, and we'll talk about this hopefully a little bit at the Reuters Next Conference later on this year, but I hope that we do see a real focus on the data, because it is I would say, dramatically ironic that in the information age, when we have just mountains of data in every different direction, it's downright ironic that we sometimes are further from the truth. And it's because of all the different ways that people play with the numbers. And I'm not even suggesting it's disingenuous, or at least not intentionally just disingenuous, but it is kind of disingenuous. If you look at the numbers, like, all right. I remember one time I did a bunch of work with SAP. We did a bunch of interviews. I think it was Facebook Live, or it could have been YouTube. It was one of the two, so forgive me for not remembering. But we did these, I think it was YouTube Live. So we do these broadcasts, and I interviewed probably 13 people, each for about 15 minutes, 10 minutes over the course of a long day. Well, 10 out of 12 of these interviews, I checked later on that night, and they had like 150 views and 10 likes, or 300 views and 12 likes. I'm like, okay. And then two of them just shot off. They were like 50,000 views and then 45,000 views. But those two only had like 13 likes and 14 likes. I'm like, wait a minute, if you got 12 likes from 200 views, and then you got 14 likes from 40,000 views, well, what the heck is going on there? Like, what was that view all about? Was that a bot? Was that an algorithm? Was it nothing? Did they just manufacture this information? I mean, I'd be shocked if that were the case. So there is some algorithm in place that is designed to capture this. But again, remember what they're doing. And YouTube is actually pretty good about showing you when they drop off, and the statistics you can get from that stuff are just absolutely fantastic. But nonetheless, if you throw money at it, all of a sudden, pow, it just starts blowing up. Those are what we call vanity metrics. Vanity metrics are metrics that make you feel good, like, they make you feel vain, right? Because you can look, see, boss, we got 13,000 views on that video. Well, did anyone buy anything? I don't know. Jim and Sale, did anyone buy anything? No, no one bought anything. All right. Well, then you haven't quite closed the loop on what that all means. Well, in the information economy, it's really important to know the information. It's really important to trust the information. And so what does that require? Transparency. What did I read over the weekend? Elon Musk made the Twitter algorithm open source. So he's open sourced the algorithm. All I can say is, well done, my friend. Good job. Let's see a whole heck of a lot more of that, right? And then ChatGPT. What about ChatGPT? What about these large language models? What impact are they going to have on the world at large? They're going to have a huge impact. Okay, trust me, it's already happening. It's going to happen in spades. It's going to happen significantly for those who learn to leverage the technologies to do what they're supposed to do. A lot of people are getting all excited thinking, ChatGPT is sentient. They're asking it questions, which is fine. Why not ask it questions about whether or not it's alive? It told some New York Times reporter that it loves the reporter and suggested it leave your wife. You got to love that. But I would argue that happened because the reporter was misusing the tool. It's a misuse of the tool to ask it those kinds of questions. That's not its intended purpose. That's not what it was designed to do. We'll pick this up after the break. You are listening to Inside Analysis. All right, folks, back here on Inside Analysis, your host, Eric Kavanaugh. Going solo like Jason Derulo. I'm pretty excited about that. I saw him at a Domopalooza conference a couple years ago. He was fantastic. Very, very good performer. Great songs. I loved it. Going solo, talking all about the Reuters Next Conference coming up in New York, November 8th and 9th. Yours truly will be on stage. That's right. I'm going to moderate a panel, a 30-minute panel. They say 7 million people streamed the event live last year. 7 million. They say 1.1 billion people saw some part of the show or experienced something. I'm presuming they're including news articles that were read by folks who wrote articles about, or folks who read articles about the show. They said 165 articles were spun out of the show. That's pretty impressive too. It was a fantastic program. I'm telling you, heavy hitters all around. wonderful organization. I'm really just excited as heck to be speaking at that event. So Reuters Next, November 8th and 9th. Don't miss it. Hop online for details about that. But we're going to talk about leadership and the importance of leadership. Now, you think about organizations, and I've spent a lot of time thinking about this. There's going to be a natural tension in every organization, depending upon the roles and the people who are involved and which roles they have. And tension is not a bad thing. There was a guy, Stephen Walmsley, I learned from, 20 odd years ago. It was 2005, I want to say, that I spent some time working with him. He's a consultant out of Canada, Toronto area. And he talked about the importance of tension, and that you want some level of tension within your organization. Too much, things break. Too little, everyone goes soft and bad things happen. So you want the right amount of tension. I thought that was very interesting. But that got me thinking about tension between different people in the organization. So you'll always have tension between sales and marketing, because sales is always going to want more leads. For example, marketing is always going to say, well, you should do a better job with the leads you got. Right. So that's a healthy tension. There's nothing wrong with that, but it just needs to be managed. Well, who gets to manage that? The leader does. That's the leader's job. A leader's job is to manage the key players who run an organization. Now, I've been in a company before where the leader left and was gone and there was no leader. And you know what? We did just fine. It was for a couple months, like 2-3 months or something. Everything was fine. And that's a sign of a good corporate culture. That's when people know what to do. They're in the right jobs. They're doing the jobs they're supposed to do, and everything's fine. I think we probably could have kept on going for, I don't know, for a year or longer. Who knows? Because we all sort of understood. But you do need the general manager or the chief executive for lots of reasons. One, of course, is just to know who's responsible. So who's responsible when Silicon Valley Bank collapses? Well, I'll tell you who, the freaking CEO is responsible. I watched a video of him. It was just bizarre. He was like, oh, I know it's a big ask, but, I'm asking you to be there for each other and all this crap. Like, as he flew off to Hawaii, as I recall, I think he flew off to Hawaii for like a 2-week vacation or something to decompress, right? As he had just evaporated all of his bondholders and shareholders' wealth. Sorry, maybe next time. Like, oops, that's a huge, huge mistake, folks. And then there was just a terrible rumbling all around the financial world. Remember, there was a rumbling after FTX collapsed. As well, there should have been, because that was a big deal too. And that was just ridiculous. I mean, honest to goodness, that guy, God bless him. I mean, you look at that storyline and just talk about a failure of leadership at the SEC, in our government, at FTX. There's a tremendous failure of leadership at those organizations. And I'm telling you, when a company fails, it is always, and it always will be, the responsibility of the leadership. So that's why I'm excited to talk about leadership at this conference, because it is such a big deal. And I think it's really underappreciated. I think good management is underappreciated. Good leadership is underappreciated. We talk a lot about it, but again, when times are great, when the money is rolling, well, anyone can seem like a good leader. It's when things get tough that the real leaders stand up and they find a way to pull their people through. I've seen it myself before. First time I ever had a good manager, and it was really a good manager, I didn't even know what a good manager was, okay? That's what I'm trying to communicate here. It was 2005. His name is Peter Quinn, and he was the guy who lured me up to Seattle to work for the Data Warehousing Institute, TDWI, where I launched their webinar campaign a long, long time ago. And he's just a good guy. He's a captain, and he was dealing with a very interesting and dynamic and diverse organization, because at TDWI, we had our in-person education, we had conferences, we had on-site stuff. I brought them webinars. The point being, there's a lot of different stuff going around, a lot of moving parts, a lot of key executives who are running different things, a research organization. So there's a lot of stuff, a lot of different people to manage, and a lot of, let's be honest, egos, right? If you're a senior director or a C-level executive somewhere, you probably have an ego, because you probably learned a few things along the way, and you're self-confident. So having someone who can sort of manage all that and manage the fires that get set by various people and just keep everyone steady, that's what he was very good at. And I remember when I realized what a good manager is like, it really kind of blew my mind, because I was up in Seattle. I'd moved all the way up to Seattle. And there I was in this whole new place from way down south, living in Austin, Texas, and going back and forth to New Orleans. And all of a sudden, I'm up in the Pacific Northwest. And it's beautiful. I mean, it's a beautiful place. It's a bit cold, to be honest. So we moved up there in the summer, which is a good move, but very, very deceptive because you're there in the summer, you think this is great. And then the winter comes around and it's gray every day for like 6 months or something. But still, I love Seattle. I had a good time there. And one of my first meetings, I think my first or second meeting, in fact, with my boss, it was Monday morning, 10 a.m. I got in there. He had a great management style that I'll share with you. It was brilliant. He would always start with very informal. How are you doing? You know, how's your girlfriend, et cetera? How's the family? How are you settling in? All this stuff. And what he would do is he would work in slowly in concentric circles, moving closer and closer into what he wanted to talk about. Now, on this particular occasion, there wasn't too much of that because it was like my first meeting with him. But I learned over time that was his way of doing it. And his point was he wanted you to figure out what he wanted to talk about. He wanted you to have the aha moment in your head instead of him having to say, hey, I heard that you had some trouble with so-and-so, what's going on there? Instead, he would just ask, how are things going? And he would wait for you to figure it out, which I thought was brilliant. I mean, I wish I could do that more effectively. And I probably can, maybe someday I will, but he was so good at that. I was like, wow, I thought about it later, like, dude, that's clever, right? Because that way he's not telling you things, he's just asking you questions, hoping that you're going to follow the breadcrumbs to the issue that needs to be addressed, which is always, of course, an important issue in business. Well, at the end of the meeting, near the end of the meeting, he just kind of stopped and looked down, looked at me and said, so what can I do for you? And I remember thinking to myself, did some VP just walk in behind me? And is he talking to that person? I looked over my head, like, is there someone there? Like, is this guy talking to me? Like, what do you mean? What can you do for me? You're my boss. What is help me understand. Honest to God, I didn't really, it took me a minute, like, oh, he's actually asking me what he could do for me. Like, what? I couldn't believe it. I'm telling you right now. Now, maybe that's because I didn't have, good management leading up to that point in time. I don't know, but I got to tell you, it freaked me out. I was like, wow, that's different. Like, I haven't seen that before. A boss who asks, what can I do for you? Like, what? Like, what? It was awesome. 3 months later, he got fired, but he was a great boss for me. And of course, then someone rose up and got the position. My other friend, Megan Berberich, she took over running the organization. And then about a year later, she quit. And that's when we didn't have a leader for like 2 or 3 months or something, a long time. And the organization worked just fine. That's because it had good culture, which is why, because it had good leadership. I'll end this segment talking about the school where my child goes. I have a 9-year-old. I'm a late bloomer. She's in 4th grade, and the principal, Mr. Smith, I believe his name was, nice suits. This guy has got nice suits for being a principal of a regional school. Who dresses well. Every day when he was principal, he's now moved on, but every day he would come out with a couple key members of his staff out in front of the school, rain or shine, and would stand there greeting all of the drop-offs, all the people who drove their kids in cars. He would stand out there and welcome all of them into the school every day. I was like, who is this guy? Someone told me that's the principal. I'm like, get out of town. That's the principal standing up there every single day? Yes, that's right. That's the principal of the school. It's good leadership. I went and did their whole science day, their science Olympiad day. I volunteered along with 90 other parents who all volunteered. Why does that happen? Good culture, which comes from good leadership. That's right, folks. You've been listening to Inside Analysis. All right, folks, time for the podcast bonus segment here on Inside Analysis. A very special show today. Yours truly, Eric Kavanaugh, doing the Jason Derulo. I'm going solo, talking all about Reuters Next, coming up November 8th and 9th. Yours truly will be there in person, so come on out to see me if you can. It's going to be a great show. I'm very, very excited about this. Very excited for the folks helping me make it happen. That would be Steve McMillan, CEO of Teradata, and Steve Lucas, CEO of Boomi. They're doing really cool things, by the way, so let's look those folks up when you can. But we're talking about leadership today and what it means. And so for the podcast bonus segment, I figured I'd talk just for a couple of minutes about what I think constitutes good leadership. And I'll look to the people in my life who helped me make good decisions. Of course, I made a few bad ones too, but that wasn't their fault. That was my fault, right? Good leaders will never lead you astray. How about that? So that's one rule for you. They'll never lead you astray. But good leaders do a bunch of different things. Number one, they pay attention, right? And they stay focused. And it's really imperative to kind of have principles to live by. So I found that leaders who have good principles are going to be pretty good leaders. They understand work ethic. They understand what's fair is fair. They understand the importance of rules and policies and not bending those rules, at least not too much. And being fair about things. So you can come up with all kinds of policies as long as you adhere to them and they are transparent, then you're going to be just fine. But leaders also do a lot of other things. Number one, they certainly work hard. There's no doubt about that. They stay focused, but they know how to delegate too, right? Good leadership involves delegation. You can't do it all yourself, and you have to kind of know when that's starting to happen with a particular task, and then you have to delegate it. Well, when you're a small company sort of building up from the ground, that can be a difficult thing to do, especially, like, I'll be honest, in our business, very specialized business that we run. I mean, we run a sort of hybrid media analyst firm. So we do research, we do white papers, we do webinars. We like to do our research transparently on live broadcasts. That's one of my favorite things to do, is do these live broadcasts where we talk to folks and we learn all sorts of good things about them. And we do so transparently. So we do so in the round, as they say. So leadership requires good understanding of the task at hand. What is the purpose of the company that we're running here? What is our day-to-day operation? What do the numbers look like, right? You got to always pay attention to the financial side of things. And that's been difficult a couple times. We're in our 13th, 14th year now of the Bloor Group. We founded way back in 2010. So we've been doing this a long time. And there have been really good times. There have been not as good times, and then really good times again, then not as good times. And now we're kind of going through a little strange patch here in the marketplace. I noticed things getting strange in July of last year. So we had to prune back expenses. I had to talk to the people we work with and say, hey, man, it's not going to be like it was for a while. So if you can stick around, that's great. But you're going to have to make less money as we get through this difficult period. And so several key members of our staff stuck around, and they're still working with us. And we're doing a lot better than we were, that I feared. I'll say that. When SVB collapsed, I was, pretty concerned. I'm not going to lie. Like, that's our core audience out there, is Silicon Valley. So when Silicon Valley Bank collapsed, I mean, goodness gracious, that is an epic development. But it's going to, I think, root out some of the lesser viable business models. And it's going to take good leadership to get out of that. It's going to take good leadership in Silicon Valley and transparency, right? We were talking for a minute ago about ChatGPT and transparency, and Elon Musk making the Twitter algorithm open source. That's transparency. Elon Musk making everyone's tweets transparent in terms of the traction they're getting. That's transparency. That's good leadership. A good leader can pull you through really difficult times just by having the vision, having the conviction, and being fair with people. If you're fair with people, they're going to remember that. They're going to come back to you and work with you again. If you're not fair with people, that's not going to work out so well. And boy, these days, I mean, what goes around comes around for sure. And people remember. They remember who it was easy to work with. They remember who it might have been hard to work with, for example. And people want to work with people who do good jobs and who are easy to work with. Well, good leadership gets you there too. So in my opinion, leadership, it really is just of crucial importance in organizations. A lot of times people, think, oh, my boss is kind of a jerk, this and that. That may well be. I don't know. Obviously, some bosses are nicer than others, for sure. And you have to be nice, but you also have to be stern. You have to be strict. You have to have some level of solvency to keep the party going. And I know what it takes to do that. It takes hard work. It takes hard effort. It takes pivoting, knowing when to pivot. And I can tell you this ChatGPT thing, just to close on that, ChatGPT will already have changed like half of the jobs out there by the time, I don't know, June rolls around. It's going to be a big deal, but it's not so much going to take jobs away. That's usually the storyline in the media. More, it's going to change jobs. So the people who learn how to use these tools, they're going to be the ones in demand. The people who don't want to use those tools, well, they're going to have to look for other kinds of work. But ChatGPT, for all its shortcomings, and there are shortcomings, I think my buddy Sarbjit Johal said they released it too early. It was probably a mistake. But for all shortcomings, it is going to be a very, very impactful and significant development. And the bottom line is, it's good to learn what these things do. It's good to learn how they operate. Good leadership will get you there by encouraging you. That's the other thing good leaders do, is they encourage people to challenge themselves and to do better and to stay on track and to do good works. And with that, folks, I'll bid you farewell. It's been a fantastic show, Inside Analysis today. Send me an email, info@insideanalysis.com. I'd love to hear what you want to know, and I hope to see you in November at Reuters Next. Take care. Bye-bye.